In the vast stretch of space, where stars blinked like distant streetlights and galaxies spun in silent rhythm, Earth was just another small dot, blue, green, and mostly ignored. To the powerful civilizations that ruled the galaxy, our planet wasn't worth a second glance. It didn't shine with advanced tech or gleaming cities that reached into orbit. Instead, it buzzed with noise. Arguments, music, laughter, sirens, prayers whispered at dawn. To outsiders, it looked messy, unorganized, weak, but they were wrong. Deep beneath the surface of everyday life, under traffic jams, school bells, and late-night kitchen talks, something ancient slept. Not a monster, not a machine, but a kind of awareness woven into the soil, the oceans, even the air. It had been there since the first spark of life flickered in warm tidal pools. And for thousands of years, it watched. It felt every footstep, every tear dropped on dry ground, every seed planted in hope. It didn't think like humans do. It didn't plan or plot. But it remembered. The Galactic Council knew none of this. They were older than trees, older than mountains. Made up of beings from a dozen star systems, they governed with cold logic and perfect order. Their ships moved without sound. Their laws allowed no chaos. And to them, Earth was a minor anomaly, a planet teeming with emotional, unpredictable creatures who couldn't even agree on how to share their own world. They'd monitored humanity for centuries, mostly out of habit. Every now and then they'd note a new war, a strange invention, or a sudden burst of art or music that echoed oddly through deep space. But they always dismissed it as noise, until they needed resources. Earth sat near a rare, cosmic current, a stream of charged particles that could power entire fleets for generations. The Council had mapped it long ago, but left it alone because the planet below seemed too unstable to occupy. Now, with their own energy grids failing across the outer colonies, they decided it was time, not to ask, not to trade, but to take. Their arrival wasn't dramatic at first. No explosions. No sky-filling armadas. Just 3 sleek silver vessels that hovered silently over remote regions. One above a desert, one over a frozen tundra, and one above a quiet island in the Pacific. They sent down emissaries, tall, smooth-skinned figures with eyes like polished stone. Through translators, they announced that Earth's surface would be repurposed. All human activity within 50 kilometers of each landing zone must cease immediately. Resistance, they said calmly, would be corrected. Most people didn't believe it at first. Videos spread online, grainy footage of floating ships, calm voices speaking in perfect English. Some called it a hoax. Others panicked. Governments scrambled, but their weapons felt laughably small against technology that bent light and silenced sound. For a few days, the world held its breath. Then, something unexpected happened. In the desert zone, a group of farmers refused to leave their ancestral land. They stood in a circle around their well, hands linked, singing an old song passed down through generations. The Council's enforcers approached, ready to move them with non-lethal force fields. But as the first note rose into the hot air, the ground beneath the ship trembled, not from an earthquake, but from something deeper. The sand itself seemed to shift, forming patterns older than language. The ship's engine stuttered. Its shields flickered. And for the first time in recorded history, a Council vessel lost power. Not from damage, but from confusion. At the same moment, in the tundra, a young researcher working alone in a weather station noticed something strange. Her instruments showed no storm coming, yet the auroras above pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She hadn't told anyone she was scared, but the ice beneath her boots cracked in sympathy, releasing a low hum that traveled through the planet's crust like a warning. And on the island, children playing near the shore saw the ocean pull back farther than ever before, not in retreat, but in gathering. Waves stacked silently, waiting, The Council didn't understand. They ran diagnostics, checked for sabotage, scanned for hidden weapons. But there was nothing technical about what was happening. Earth wasn't fighting with guns or lasers. It was responding with memory, with feeling, with a kind of intelligence that didn't need words. Back in their command hub, orbiting far beyond the moon, the Council leaders grew uneasy. This wasn't in their models. Planets didn't react. Rocks didn't care. But Earth cared deeply. They decided to escalate. A larger fleet was summoned. This time, they wouldn't ask. They'd neutralize resistance by disabling all major communication networks. Then deploy gravity anchors to stabilize the surface for mining. Efficient. Clean. Final dot. But as their orders were sent, something shifted in the space between stars. A signal soft, almost musical rippled outward from Earth. It wasn't radio. It wasn't light. It was something older. Something that carried not data, but intent. And for the first time, beings across the galaxy paused. A trader on a distant moon dropped his cup. A pilot halfway to Andromeda felt a sudden ache in his chest. Even the Council's oldest elder, who hadn't slept in 300 years, closed his eyes and dreamed of rain down on Earth. People didn't know why, but they began to gather. Not in anger, but in quiet unity. Strangers shared water. Old enemies sat together on porches. Artists painted on walls without permission. Musicians played in subway stations until dawn. It wasn't organized. It just happened. As if the planet itself was whispering, "Remember who you are." And high above, the approaching fleet slowed, not because of force, but because something in their ships hesitated. The Council still believed they were in control. They still thought Earth was just dirt and water. But the truth was already unfolding beneath their feet. In every route, every river, every breath drawn in fear and hope. What they didn't realize was this: Earth had never been defenseless. It had simply been waiting for someone to threaten not just its people, but its soul. And now, that fury was waking up. The invasion didn't come with thunder or fire. It came in silent ships gliding over cities like shadows at noon, so smooth they barely disturbed the air. No warnings, no speeches, just a sudden stillness, as if the world had been wrapped in thick glass. Streetlights flickered out. Phones went dead. Even birds stopped singing. People looked up and saw nothing but empty sky, until they noticed the edges of buildings bending slightly, like heat haze over desert roads. That's when they knew. They weren't alone anymore. At first, the Council's forces moved with perfect precision. They didn't shoot. They didn't shout. They simply replaced things. Traffic signals turned to gray stone. Park benches dissolved into mist. A child's bicycle left on a driveway vanished overnight, not stolen, but erased, as if it had never existed. Their message was clear: your world is temporary. Ours is permanent. But Earth didn't obey. In a small town near the Rockies, a woman stood on her porch after her internet cut out. She'd been watching news of strange blackouts spreading across the country. Frustrated, she yelled into the wind, "Just leave us alone." Her voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. Nothing happened until the next morning. The field behind her house, dry for months, sprouted wildflowers overnight. Not just any flowers, ones that glowed faintly at dusk, pulsing like slow heartbeats. Scientists who snuck in later found the soil humming at a frequency that matched human brainwaves during deep emotion. Grief, anger, love, all of it, soaked into the ground. Meanwhile, in a coastal city, a group of teenagers huddled in a subway tunnel, sharing a single battery-powered radio. They heard static, then a broken voice, someone broadcasting from a lab that had lost power. "They're not just taking our tech," the voice whispered. "They're trying to unmake us. like we were never here. One of the teens, hand shaking, tapped a rhythm on the tunnel wall, a beat from an old song his grandfather used to hum. Within minutes, the concrete around them began to vibrate. Not violently, just enough to send a low-frequency wave through the earth that scrambled the nearest scout drone's sensors. It dropped from the sky like a dead insect dot. No one planned this. There were no generals, no secret bases. Just ordinary people reacting in real time, and the planet responding in kind. Deep underground, in abandoned mines and forgotten tunnels, something stirred. Old seismic monitors, long considered junk, started recording strange patterns. Not earthquakes, not tremors. More like breathing. The crust itself seemed to flex in rhythm with human activity. When crowds gathered in silent protest, fault lines tensed. When someone played piano in an empty square, nearby rivers changed course by inches, drawn to the sound. The council noticed. Of course they did, but they couldn't explain it. Their scanners showed no energy weapons, no hidden armies. Just humans crying, singing, arguing, holding hands and the ground beneath them acting like it was alive. Then came the night, everything changed. A research station in the Arctic lost contact. Not because it was destroyed, but because the ice around it grew upward, forming smooth, curved walls that sealed the building inside a dome of pure frost. Inside, the scientists were fine, warm, calm, and on every window, frost patterns formed shapes, faces, trees, constellations unknown to modern astronomy. One researcher later said it felt like the planet was showing them memories, things it had seen long before humans walked upright. That same night, in a desert village, a grandmother lit a candle during a power outage. As the flame danced, the sand outside her door swirled, not from wind, but from nothing. It formed spirals, then symbols older than writing. By dawn, those symbols had spread across miles of dunes, glowing softly under moonlight. Satellites tried to photograph them, but the images came back blurred, as if the camera itself refused to capture what it saw. The council grew uneasy. Their logic-based systems couldn't process cause and effect here. A scream shouldn't collapse gravity. A lullaby shouldn't reroute magnetic fields. But it was happening. And worse, it was spreading. They decided to test Earth's limits. They targeted a remote island known for its quiet forests and clean water. Their plan: deploy a suppression field to neutralize all organic electrical activity plants, animals, even human nervous systems, just enough to render the area docile. It had worked on other worlds, but the moment the field activated, the island's oldest tree, a 1,000-year-old giant, released a pulse of pollen so dense it turned the air gold. Anyone who breathed it felt calm, focused, and strangely strong. Fishermen on nearby boats reported their nets filling on their own. Birds flew in perfect formation, not migrating, but guarding. And when council drones descended to investigate, vines shot up from the soil, not to attack, but to gently wrap around the machines and pull them underground like the Earth was tucking them away for safekeeping. Back in orbit, the council debated. Some argued for full-scale intervention. Others whispered doubts. What if this planet isn't just alive, but aware? But pride won. They couldn't admit they'd underestimated a world they'd labeled primitive. So they sent more ships. Bigger ones. This time, armed. But Earth was ready. Not with weapons. With connection. In cities, villages, mountains, and valleys. People began doing simple things. Things they'd always done, but now with purpose. Baking bread, telling stories, planting seeds, singing while washing dishes. And with each act, the planet responded. Street cracks filled with moss that glowed at night. Rain fell only where it was needed. Broken windows sealed themselves with crystalline film grown from morning dew. The invaders found their tech failing not from sabotage, but from disinterest. Metal rusted in hours. Circuits shorted without warning. Even their language translators began outputting poetry instead of commands. They still didn't understand. Earth wasn't fighting them with force. It was reminding them, through every leaf, every breath, every heartbeat, that some things can't be controlled. That life isn't just data to be managed. It's messy, emotional, unpredictable, and powerful beyond calculation. And the more the council pushed, the more Earth pushed back, not with rage, but with stubborn, quiet truth. The spark had been lit, not by a bomb or a broadcast, but by a million small acts of being human. And now, the sky itself was starting to listen. People began to notice things changing, not just outside, but inside themselves. It started with dreams, vivid ones, not of spaceships or war, but of deep forests, ancient rivers, and stars so close you could almost touch them. Waking up, many felt a strange calm, like they'd been reminded of something important they'd forgotten long ago. They didn't talk about it much at first, but in grocery lines, on bus stops, and quiet corners of parks, strangers would catch each other's eyes and nod like they all knew the same secret. Down in the soil, roots tangled in new patterns, connecting trees across miles like underground wires. Farmers found their crops growing faster, stronger, and somehow smarter. Wheat bent away from approaching storms. Vines wrapped around broken fences to hold them together. Bees returned to hives that had been empty for years, carrying pollen that shimmered under sunlight. And then there were the sounds. Not loud noises, but whispers, felt more than heard. A low hum in the bones when standing barefoot on grass. A soft chime in the wind before rain. People started leaving their headphones behind. They walked slower, listened more. Children played outside longer, not because screens stopped working, but because the real world suddenly felt more alive than any game. The council watched from orbit, baffled. Their sensors showed no weapons being built, no armies forming. Yet their ships kept losing power near coastlines. Their drones got lost in city streets that seemed to shift overnight. One scout reported seeing a river flow uphill for 3 seconds, just long enough to douse a fire in a village below. When they reviewed the footage, it looked normal. But the pilot swore it happened. Back on Earth, scientists who once dismissed Earth energy as myth now gathered in basements and libraries, comparing notes. They found something wild. Seismic data matched global moments of collective emotion. When millions held a moment of silence for those lost in the early invasions, tectonic stress dropped across entire continents. When a viral video showed a street musician playing for tired rescue workers, nearby fault lines relaxed like a sigh. It wasn't magic. It was memory. The planet remembered every kindness, every tear, every seed planted in hope. And now, it was answering. In mountains where glaciers had melted for decades, ice began to creep back, not from cold, but from stillness. In deserts, dry riverbeds filled with clear water after communities gathered to sing old songs under full moons. No one organized these gatherings. They just happened, like the land itself was calling people home. Even animals changed. Birds nested on rooftops instead of fleeing cities. Wolves walked through towns without fear, pausing to look into windows as if checking on families. Dolphins swam closer to shores, leaping in rhythm with children's laughter. It felt like the whole world was breathing together. The council tried to reason with this. They sent messages. Cease resistance. Surrender resources. Avoid further correction. But their words fell flat. Not because humans ignored them, but because the air itself seemed to absorb the transmissions and turn them into static. Radios played lullabies instead. Public screens showed sunrises over oceans no one had mapped. Frustrated, The council deployed their harmony dampeners, devices designed to suppress emotional frequencies and restore logical order. They floated over major cities, humming with cold precision. For a few hours, people felt numb, quiet, empty, like joy had been switched off. But then, a single voice broke through. Somewhere in a small town, someone opened a window and sang an old folk song, the kind passed down through generations, about storms and survival. Others joined, not knowing why. Soon, entire neighborhoods were singing, not in protest, but in remembrance. And as the sound rose, the dampeners cracked. Not from force, but from overload. Too much feeling, too much life. The machines couldn't handle it. One by one, they fell from the sky, not exploding, but crumbling into dust that smelled like rain. That night, people lit candles, not for fear, but for connection. Millions of tiny flames flickered across continents, and satellites captured something astonishing. The light patterns matched ancient star maps carved into caves thousands of years ago. As if humanity, without planning, had drawn the same constellations their ancestors saw. The council's leaders argued fiercely. Some insisted Earth was infected with a biological anomaly. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, they'd made a terrible mistake. But pride is hard to shake, especially when you've ruled the stars for centuries. So they prepared their final move, the core anchor, a massive device meant to lock Earth's rotation, stabilize its magnetic field, and render it inert, like turning a living thing into stone. Once anchored, the planet would be safe to mine, forever silent. They didn't know that Earth had already begun to wake up fully. Deep in the mantle, molten currents shifted. Not randomly, but with purpose. Magnetic poles trembled, not to flip, but to focus. And high above, the auroras blazed brighter than ever, not just near the poles, but over every continent, painting the sky in colors no human had ever seen. People looked up and felt it. A pull. Not fear, not anger. Something deeper. Like the planet was saying, "Stand with me." And they did, not with weapons. Not with hate, but with presence. With memory. With every story ever told, every seed ever planted, every hand ever held. Because Earth wasn't just dirt and water. It was a witness. A keeper. And now, it was ready to defend not just its surface, but the soul of everyone who called it home. The sky didn't crack open with fire. There was no explosion, no blinding flash. Instead, everything went quiet, too quiet. Birds stopped mid-flight. Wind held its breath. Even the hum of electricity and power lines faded into silence. People stepped outside, not because they were told to, but because something deep inside them said, "Look up." High above, the Council's final weapon, the core anchor, hung in orbit like a silver seed. It pulsed with cold light, ready to lock Earth's spin, freeze its magnetic heart, and turn the planet into a still, obedient rock. From their command ship, the Council watched with grim satisfaction. This would end it. No more strange vibrations. No more singing fields. Just order. Just control. But Earth had other plans. As the anchor activated, sending its first pulse toward the planet's core, something unexpected happened. The pulse didn't sink in. It bounced. Not like an echo, but like a stone skipping across water that suddenly remembered it could fly. The energy twisted, folded, and shot back into space, not as a weapon, but as a message. And it carried something the Council had never encountered. Feeling. Not just human emotion, but the accumulated memory of billions of years of oceans forming, forests breathing, creatures evolving, stars being born and dying. All of it wrapped in a single wave of pure awareness. The moment it hit the Council's fleet, their systems didn't fail. They woke up. Lights flickered on ships that had run on silent logic for centuries. Panels displayed images not from sensors, but from dreams, faces of long-lost children, sunsets on dead worlds, songs no one had sung in generations. Pilots froze, hands trembling over controls, tears streaming down faces that hadn't known grief in lifetimes. Their machines, built to obey without question, began asking, why? Then, the stars started to go out, not exploding, not collapsing, just fading. One by one, the lights that had guided the council for eons dimmed, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Navigation failed. Time signals stuttered. Gravity wells shifted without warning. Their perfect cosmic order unraveled, not through violence, but through disconnection. Like threads pulled from a tapestry, their civilization began to come apart at the seams. On Earth, people felt it to a deep low thrum in their chests, like the planet was humming a lullaby to a frightened child. But this time, the child wasn't Earth. It was the galaxy. Cities didn't burn. Skies didn't darken. Instead, something beautiful happened. Streetlights glowed softer, warmer. Rain fell gently over dry lands. Trees stretched taller, not in panic, but in peace. People gathered not in fear, but in quiet awe. They held hands, shared food, told stories under open skies. No one shouted. No one ran. Because for the first time, they understood. They weren't fighting an enemy. They were reminding the universe what it meant to be alive. The council's leaders tried to retreat, to shield their homeworlds. But their ships wouldn't respond. Not because they were broken, but because their crews refused to obey. Soldiers who had followed orders for centuries looked at each other and whispered, "What have we done?" Engineers shut down weapons not out of fear, but shame. Commanders stared at view screens showing Earth blue, green, glowing with life, and realized they'd spent lifetimes chasing control while forgetting wonder. Back on the surface, a fisherman mended his net by candlelight. He didn't know about star maps or energy pulses, but he felt the ocean move differently, calmer, wiser. In a mountain village, an old woman planted seeds in cracked soil. By morning, green shoots pushed through, curling toward the sun like they knew exactly where to go. In a city square, a street musician played a tune so simple it made strangers cry, not from sadness, but from remembering something true. And high above, the core anchor drifted, powerless. Its cold light dimmed. Then, slowly, it began to bloom like a metal flower opening in sunlight. Vines of crystalline energy grew from its surface, not destroying it, but transforming it. Within hours, it became a floating garden, humming with the same frequency as Earth's forests. Satellites captured the image, a weapon turned into a sanctuary, orbiting peacefully like a new moon. The Council's last transmission wasn't a threat. It was a question. How? Earth didn't answer with words. It answered with presence. Across the galaxy, beings who had never questioned authority now paused. A trader on a distant moon dropped his cargo and walked into the sea, just to feel water again. A scientist erased her life's work and started painting instead. Children on colony worlds pointed to the sky and asked, "Why did the stars forget us?" And for the first time, adults didn't have answers, because the truth was simple. You can't control life. You can only join it. On Earth, people didn't celebrate victory. There was no parade, no cheering, just quiet gratitude. They watered gardens, fixed broken fences, sang to babies. And every night, they looked up not in fear, but in wonder at a sky that was slowly remembering how to shine. The fury wasn't in destruction. It was in refusal to be silenced, to be forgotten, to be treated like dirt. And in that refusal, Earth didn't just defend itself. It healed something broken far beyond its own atmosphere. The stars would return, in time. But they'd never be the same. Because now, they carried a whisper, a reminder that even the smallest world, full of messy, emotional, unpredictable beings, could change the fate of the cosmos, just by remembering how to care. Years passed. Not many, but enough for wounds to heal, for fear to soften into memory, and for new routines to take root. The sky was quiet now. No silver ships. No strange hums in the air. Just birds, wind, and the steady rhythm of life returning to its own pace. People didn't talk much about what happened. Not because it was forgotten, but because it didn't need explaining anymore. It lived in the way a farmer paused to touch the soil before planting. In the way children ran barefoot through grass, laughing like they knew a secret the stars once missed. Earth had changed, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no floating cities or laser towers. No alien tech repurposed into wonder weapons. Instead, the change was quieter, deeper. Rivers ran clearer, not because filters were installed, but because fewer people threw things away without thinking. Forests grew back faster, not from replanting alone, but because communities chose to walk instead of drive, to share instead of hoard. It wasn't perfection, just a shift in attention. People began to listen again, not just to each other, but to the world around them. You could feel it in small things. A baker leaving extra bread for neighbors on cold mornings. A teenager fixing a broken swing in the park without being asked. An old man teaching kids how to read clouds before rain. These weren't grand acts of heroism. They were ordinary kindnesses, but now they carried weight. Because everyone understood, deep down, that care mattered. That every choice rippled outward, touching more than just the moment. The planet responded in kind. Storms still came, but they felt less angry, more like necessary breaths. Earthquakes grew rare, and when they did happen, they struck empty places as if the ground itself tried to avoid harm. Even the seasons seemed gentler, unfolding with patience instead of force. Scientists who once chased data now sat quietly in fields, notebooks open, the pen still, just watching. They'd learned that some truths can't be measured, only felt. Out in space, silence reigned where the Galactic Council once ruled. Their great halls stood empty. Their fleets drifted, powered down, waiting for orders that would never come. Some said their worlds collapsed into chaos. Others whispered they simply walked away, choosing to live quietly among ruins, tending gardens under dimmed stars, finally understanding what they'd lost by chasing control. No one came looking for Earth again. Not out of fear, but respect. The message had been clear. Some forces aren't meant to be conquered. They're meant to be honored. On Earth, people stopped building walls. Not just physical ones, but the invisible kinds too. Borders still existed on maps, but in daily life, they blurred. A musician in one country would play a tune, and someone oceans away would hear it in a dream, then hum it while fixing a roof. Seeds traveled in pockets, not for profit, but for sharing. Languages mixed. Recipes blended. And slowly, without speeches or laws, humanity began to remember it was one family. Messy, flawed, but connected. Schools changed. Children didn't just learn math and history. They learned to read the wind, to track animal paths, to understand that silence can speak louder than noise. They planted trees not for carbon credits, but because it felt right. And when they looked up at night, they didn't see empty darkness. They saw a sky that had once gone quiet and returned. Humble. There were no monuments to the war. No statues of heroes. Instead, communities built gathering circles, simple rings of stone or wood where people could sit, share stories, or just be together. Sometimes, nothing was said for hours. But no one felt awkward. Because presence became its own language. Old fears didn't vanish overnight. Some nights, people still woke in sweat, remembering the silence of the invasion, the dread of helplessness. But now they knew what to do. They'd step outside, press their palms to the earth, and breathe. And always the ground would answer with warmth, with life, with the quiet certainty that they were not alone. Visitors from other parts of the world noticed it first. Travelers who came expecting chaos found calm. Journalists who arrived looking for drama left with notebooks full of quiet moments. A shared meal under string lights. An elder teaching a child how to weave baskets. A community rebuilding a bridge, not because it was broken, but because working together felt good. Earth hadn't become perfect. People still argued. Mistakes were made. Storms still flooded towns. But something fundamental had shifted. The idea that power meant domination had faded. In its place grew a quieter truth. Real strength lies in balance, in giving as much as you take, in listening as much as you speak, in protecting not just yourself, but everything around you. And the planet? It thrived. Not in flashy ways, but in steady, enduring ones. Bees returned in numbers no one thought possible. Coral reefs glowed with color again. Wolves howled in forests where they hadn't been heard in decades. It wasn't magic. It was reciprocity. Care given, care returned. Years later, when new generations asked, "What happened back then?" elders wouldn't give long lectures. They'd just smile and say, "We remembered we belonged here." And that was enough. Because the greatest lesson wasn't about fighting aliens or saving the world. It was about coming home to the soil, to each other, to the simple truth that fury isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to forget that you matter, that your world matters. And that love for a place, for people, for life itself can shake the stars.